I was at a car boot sale one Sunday recently where a woman was selling pots and another man was buying. The selling woman had a cross hanging from her neck and the buying woman wore a hijab. And nobody was asking what religion the pots were. Then I saw a man selling roses from the back of a van. He might have been Ukrainian, or he might have been Russian. It didn't matter to the roses. And there were Africans there, and travellers, and two Italian men in the sunshine sharing a cigarette with a man who had an English accent and who was wearing a yellow high-visibility jacket. In fact, there were lots of orange and yellow high-visibility jackets for sale, hanging on the empty frame of one of the stalls. And there were people with sausage dogs, fur coats, and racks of shirts, and denim trousers, and big blue barrels, and a horse box for sale. There were clocks, and delf dogs, ornaments for the mantelpiece, and wheels for wheelbarrows. And of course, the roses, and the walking sticks. The philosopher George Steiner used to say that Europe as an idea was created in the coffee houses of various cities across the continent. Because there was always war, and always people who fled from war, and invariably they settled in cities and were poor, and they collected in coffee houses where they spread great ideas like a virus, fusing stories, memories, philosophy, dreams of the future. And so Europe was born into its own unique modernity. Now that's what I think of when I'm scouring the car boot sales on Sunday mornings. It's not that I'm looking for anything in particular, and I'm not looking for conversation, but it's amazing to think that it's on these liminal spaces that some new world may already be germinating, and that will one day evolve into a new Ireland. I'm not saying that the car boot sales of Ireland are going to turn into the Open University. And the conversations I have in such places are always banal anyway. Like saying, that's a bad day, and him saying, will it last? People from all nationalities and backgrounds who live sometimes in the squalor gather in open markets to cheer themselves up and meet other people. But it's their children who will go to school and university and find each other in canteens along the way, asking questions like, where are you from? And answering it with phrases like, yeah, I'm from Carrick-on-Shannon too. It won't happen for my generation. We are too steeped in identities that will not give way to blending genders or accepting native Irish speakers with names like Muhammad. I knew an old man who used to sit by the range in the public house in Glengevlin long ago, with a cap on his head and a pipe in his mouth, as young people watched the television in the far corner. He would rehearse questions in his head all day, and then toss them out at night in the kitchen of the bar to stimulate conversation. Now here's a conundrum, he'd say, and then he'd go on to ask why the Americans were in Vietnam or why the British were in Fermanagh, and had I ever met anyone from Africa. He always had a question. What got him wound up more than all else were the antics of various pop groups on Top of the Pops. The grammar of goth or rock with long-haired men in glittering jackets and streaks of mascara down their cheeks, gyrating around the stage and bouncing up and down and banging off the microphones. Well, it used to fascinate him. The spectacle fascinated him, and he would take long sucks from his pipe and smile, or he'd tap his foot to songs like, "I am the god of hell's fire," and he'd say, "Well, sure, that's the future now." He meant that what he thought of as strange was someday going to be normal. And he was right. And I find myself in the same position now. Sometimes because of age or the limited life of a writer who has lived and loved in small places and quiet corners around Leitrim, Cavan and a few other counties, I realise that though the future is beyond my ability to comprehend it, nonetheless, it is coming, and it is bright and vibrant and thoroughly Irish in a new way. Because we are always afraid of the future as we age, and because young people will always fly from war and grip whatever life raft they can to build a new dream of peace. You see, I suppose what I'm saying there is that you get a lot of people talking about migration and immigrants, and there's too many people. And if you walk round the town, any particular town, you can certainly feel that. And if you go to a car boot sale on a Sunday morning, you'll find a huge amount of people from diverse cultures. What I feel is that I get older and I feel more anxiety about the future. And it's contradictory because, well, in 30 years' time, I won't be here. So if people are saying that in 30 years' time, Ireland will be a changed place, or Leitrim will be a changed place, and it'll be more diverse, more cosmopolitan, more pluralism, many, many different cultures. Why would it bother me? Sure, I won't be here. And the young people, I think the young people are always very happy to meet other young people. That would be my experience of young people. You know, the one thing that young people never like, and this was true for my generation, was where you were stuck in the same company all the time. You know, where you grew up on a particular little street in a little town, and Sunday afternoon you could hear the sound of Micheál O'Hare commentating on a GAA football match, wafting out of a neighbour's door, and everywhere was sleepy, and you'd hear the football match commentators describing somebody kicking a ball into the net. And it used to be tedious. It felt like we're all the same. There's nothing happening in this little world. And you'd meet the same people everywhere. And, you know, the adults would know you. They'd say, "Oh, you're Nellie Finley's son." The word you'd use for it is claustrophobic. And you'll get that in loads of great books like John McGahern or Sean O'Whalan or various other writers over the 20th century who, the Valley of the Squinting Windows is another example of it. You know, the way that we were living enclosed And it's one of the problems if you're on an island, it's going to be enclosed. Now, Torrey Island or Arranmore Island, they're enclosed in a very intense way because there are so few people, let's say on Torrey Island. I don't know if there's 150 or 200 full-time residents all the time. So it must be very tricky because you're mixing in a little group of people, and unless you go to the mainland, you don't meet anybody else. And other people tend to stimulate us. So, to a great extent, Ireland, the whole island, it's not Torrey Island, which is tiny. And by the way, Torrey Island is beautiful. It's astonishingly beautiful physically. The landscape, the rocks, the cliffs, the walks by the ocean, the sense of the ocean on both sides of the island, and you can feel both sides of the island at the same time. You know, it's that narrow. And then you meet the people, and they have poetry and music, and you're sitting there in what they call the club, which is a kind of a place where you can have a drink at night, and you're there and you're listening to people talking in Irish, and you're sharing, maybe talking a little bit of Irish with them. So the whole thing at Torrey is very, very magical and beautiful, and I'd strongly recommend to go for a holiday. And there's a hotel on the island, just straight up, so you can get the ferry out and you can walk up to the hotel, check in, and you're there. Or book it on booking.com just in case it's full, because it would be full in the summertime. Now that's my little advertisement for Torrey Island, because I do think it is a very, very beautiful place. But the isolation of an island is still a reality. And even with the population that we have in the south of Ireland, when we were growing up, and the population was much less at that time, and we had no internet, and there wasn't as much air travel because Ryanair didn't exist, and to go on Aer Lingus to London it would cost a fortune. It was very expensive, which meant that, people rarely got off the island. And there was a huge sense of claustrophobia, and young people, in my day when I was young, we all wanted something different, something novel, something strange. And I think young people will always want that, because they instinctively know that when you connect with other people, you sharpen your own consciousness, you sharpen your own awareness of the world, and you begin to measure other people's experience against your own, and you are able to critique your own experience in a better way. You just become a better person. And I say that as somebody who hasn't been, living in London or New York for the past 40 years. I've lived all my life in the country. So I know the riches of country life. And my preferential option in life has been the country. This is where I love. I love the solitude. I'm looking out the window as I speak, and I'm looking at the wild roses. I'm looking at the cherry tree, and I can see across the lake Slieveneeren, the mountain. This is where my soul awakens. But I also know that it's necessary to meet other people and to have that engagement with other people. And that's what we didn't have when we were young, and that's what we have now. So I think that it's a wonderful and beautiful thing that there are more and more people coming into Ireland. And I really don't think we have anything to worry about in relation to the future. I always tell a story about Leitrim. I was buying a stove one time from a man in Leitrim. Now he was from, I think it was Holland. He was from Holland. I saw it in the newspaper. It was even before Dundee existed. It was in the local newspaper. He had a stove for sale, went over to talk to him. And I brought the lady wife because she was going to use this stove. And it ended up anyway that she's in the kitchen chatting to the fella who's selling the stove, and I'm sitting in the Renault 16 outside in the backyard. And as I'm sitting there, there's a fella comes down the yard towards my car. Now, he's the son of a man who's from Holland. And yet he walks with a kind of a strange old way of dragging one foot after the other that you could only describe as a Leitrim walk, right? A culshy walk. And he looks in the window at me and he says, "How are you doing?" And I said, "Hello." And he said, "She has a spring gone in the back." And he meant the car. And he said it, you could not tell, but you were speaking to somebody whose people had been living in Leitrim for 100 years. He had all the cadences in his voice. He had all the perceptions in his, in his mind, the very thing that he was looking at, that the back wheel was in some way wonky, and he knew from his, as a teenager, his interest in cars. He knew what was wrong. And he didn't introduce himself in any formal way. He didn't use any kind of etiquette that you might associate with a civilized person from Holland. No. He spoke like a civilized young country lad from Leitrim. Because that's what he was. And that's in one generation. And there are other cultures who come to Ireland and they don't integrate as quickly. Somebody from Holland is going to integrate in Ireland rather quickly because simply there's not a big gap culturally between us. But whether somebody comes from, Poland, for example, was seen as very, very exotic and strange 20 or 30 years ago. There was a time before the Soviet Union collapsed, and nobody had really met anybody from Poland. And the first Polish people that arrived in Ireland, everybody thought, "Oh my goodness, this is something very new and strange." And now, we kind of know a bit more about Poland. We know a bit more, like we're in relationship with Poland. We know the colours of their flag. We know the style of their personalities. We know the shops that sell Polish food. We know the Polish food. We eat pierogies, and they've become like the family down the road in their tens of thousands. And I think everybody knows how valuable they are. Poles and Lithuanians and people from Europe, and how they've transformed to a great extent the service industry, because so many jobs in the service industry, and you can't find Irish people to do the jobs, and many Irish people don't want to do the jobs because they want to go to college, they want university education, they want. So who's going to do the cleaning in the hotel? And you find that everywhere you go, you're in and out of hotels, and you'll hear East European voices and accents and languages on the corridor. So I think that no matter where people come from, even if it's somewhere as exotic as Africa or Asia, I just believe that we will all get on together. Like it's not a big ideological issue. The style of politics in Ireland is the same, much the same as it was 50 years ago and even 100 years ago. And if you look at the change that happened when we became, free from the colonial power, when we changed from being part of the United Kingdom and we became first a free state and then a republic. Well, if you look at that point, 1922, where it all began, you realise that we didn't change much. Do you know? Village life didn't change much. The post boxes in the stone walls with VR on them, Victoria Royal, or maybe ER, Edward Royal, they got painted green. That was about all. And that's an image of how things changed even in the government of the country and the civil service. It was to some extent a change in colour, but the fundamental structures and ways of organising the country through local authorities, it remained the same. And I think that if I was here in 100 years or 50 years, which I won't be, the first thing that you'd notice different would be the population will have gone up. Now people say, Ireland is full, but the reality is it's not. It's just not. I mean, the bigger pool of people you have, the higher your standards. Because a bigger pool creates more kind of competitive energy between people to create high standards. If you look at loads of stuff that we really don't do in Ireland because we don't have the numbers. We don't have the amount of high scientists as you might find in Britain, simply not because Irish scientists lack intelligence or are not gifted, but because you need a critical mass, you need numbers of people in any area, and the standard goes up. I think it's true, to be honest with you, even in a small school. If you have a very small school, it's so valuable to have a small school in a parish, in a little country area. But you also need to challenge the children. And so you find that when the little primary school experience is over, parents will send their children to the secondary school, the vocational school. It's a bigger catchment area. And it's like a bigger world for the young 12, 11-year-old. And they're frightened of it. But they have to get in, they have to mix. And eventually they begin to love it because their standards are going up. The higher the amount of people, the standards will go up. If you have a little choir and you've only 50 children to pick from, you might have a very beautiful choir that sing with their hearts. But there'll always be a little sense of a kind of a country choir. If you were in a school of 700 or 800 students and you had a choir that you were putting together like of the best 20 singers, it would be a good choir because you have a good catchment area of people to pick from. And I think that's true in relation to opera singers, science, astronauts, so many things that if you're in the larger pool, the standards go up and you achieve more, therefore. So it's very satisfying for the individual who wants to achieve if they're in a bigger pool. And for us in Ireland, there's no doubt that the European Union has done that. It's given us this, sense that we gradually see ourselves more and more belonging in Europe, and through the Erasmus scheme and loads of other stuff, students find themselves competing at a wider European level. They find themselves going to other European universities to study and to do their postgraduate work. And all in all, the bigger the pool, everybody happier. So, so Ireland, we had a population of about 8 million before the famine, and that might be a target you would want to reach. And we're certainly not there yet. We could expand quite a bit. And maybe we could expand much bigger than 8 million because there are loads of countries as big as Ireland who have bigger populations. And they thrive. There's nothing wrong with having a bigger it may be that people like me who live in the country will be put under pressure because there'll be more people coming into rural areas wanting to live there. Or it may be that problems are created in cities because of lack of housing. But you're always going to have some social problems in any society. And the solution is to fix the problems rather than just avoid the experience. So we'll have a bigger population in 50 years' time. Is that going to change Ireland? In some sense, yes, because Ireland has changed in the past 50 years. If I describe what life was like when I used to go dancing in the ballroom of romance and fill the car with girls who weren't my girlfriend, but who I was just giving them a lift to the dance, and we'd all dance and we'd come back and go to somebody's house. We'd be there till 4 a.m, sitting around in the kitchen singing our heads off, which was what one did. It was considered as normal as conversation to be singing. And if you saw photographs of us as young people at that time, you would think that we were malnourished. Maybe some people were, but we were definitely scrawny, skeletons. You know, it was like you'd have these suits hanging on skeletons. And we used to wear suits with big wide lapels and flowered shorts. Mother of God, the things we wore and the way we looked. So that was life back in that period. And it has changed so much. We couldn't have imagined the internet. We couldn't have imagined some of the problems, like, for example, pornography on the internet for young children, like the alienation or the atomization of life that leaves us with, it's shocking even to talk about it, but it leaves us with young people, teenagers, who are in need of mental health services. I mean, there were always a few who were depressed. There was always a sense that, you know, young people might commit suicide. But never, I think never as normalized as it is now, you know, that to be alienated, isolated, going to a therapist as a teenager now is almost like it's not seen as unusual. So there's no doubt that we have problems, but those problems came from things like the internet and the way that communication has changed. And there's no doubt that there will be new problems, the world will go on, there will be wars as well. I mean, again, it was a naive thing we used to talk about when we were younger, that, you know, that there wouldn't be any more wars in Europe, for example. I remember one time being in Zurich. I was in a culture centre. Like I was there. It was one of these places, like it was for artists, where you'd go and spend 6 weeks. It was a grant, and you go and spend 6 weeks in a beautiful surroundings, writing a play or a book or whatever. And I was there writing a play at the time, as it happens. And I remember one day at the table, I had a conversation with a German woman, Ariadna. It's funny enough, her name comes back to me, Ariadna, and she was a German artist. And she said, what is it like, you know, to live in Ireland with this war? She was talking about the troubles in Northern Ireland. And I said, well, you know, it's okay. You become normal. You just live with it. You know, you drive into the main town every morning, and you might be stopped by the British Army, and they'd have very high weapons, very high sophisticated weapons, and they might put you up against the back of the Jeep and point the gun at you and interrogate you a little bit. Or they might just keep you in the car and open the boot, and then you drive on, and you would consider that normal. You're living in a war zone. And sometimes you'd hear about a killing or whatever. But she was fascinated to know, what is it like to live in a war zone? And I said, you're really interested. And she said, well, there are no more wars in Europe. Ireland must be the last place that there will be a war in Europe. It's very strange. And she was living with that delusion that, that we had finished with war and that we had become so civilized that the Irish, being out there with bombs, blowing each other to bits or blowing British soldiers to bits, that this was like a primitive behaviour from the past that she couldn't understand. And that was long before war in Yugoslavia broke out and the autonomous nation states emerged of Croatia and Serbia and so on, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and them tearing each other apart with big armies. Nobody had ever imagined that. But we got used to it and we forgot about it when it was over. And now there's a war going on in Ukraine and everybody says, well, this is terrible, it never happened before, but it did. And when it's over, and it will be finished, at some stage everybody will negotiate and it'll be over. And then life will go on and we'll forget about it. So these wars happen. They start, they go on for a while, and eventually, at some stage, they have to end. And we ordinary humans tend to just live our lives. We may be animated by a war, angry and indignant and offended by the barbarity of a war. But essentially, our lives are more than that. Our lives are just beautiful spaces between life, between birth and death. These beautiful spaces that we inhabit. Spaces of relationship with parents, with children, with lovers, with strangers, with friends. We drink a little wine, we have a little party, we do a little dancing, we get old, we get sick, we get stiff, and we pass away. And it's much the same in any country. If you pare down the basics of being human, in childhood, in old age, it's singing a few songs, drinking a few glasses of wine, and feeling loved and loving the people around you. Parents, children, friends, strangers. That's life. So that's going to go on. And even though it constantly changes, you can see also, if you look back in history, that there is a continuum. And that, in my view, no matter who comes in from other countries to live in Ireland, it seems to me that within one generation, they're Irish. They have imbibed everything to do with the culture, and they're Irish. And what they give to the native population is the opportunity to experience difference. So that's what I was trying to talk about in that column. And I'll read you one more column, actually, if that's okay. And this one, well, it's a bit lighter, but there's a connection. It's amazing how much war has been in the air recently. I haven't experienced anything like it since I lived in Fermanagh during the Troubles. There's something contagious about war. It's like a virus. It can pick up anything and turn it into a weapon. I was thinking this during the warm weather about a month ago as I sat on the lawn with the General, listening to bees buzzing. My binoculars were on the garden table next to him. Personally, I associate binoculars with big houses, walled gardens, old tartan rugs, and armchairs on the lawn. I remember seeing the writer Leland Bardwell sit up in a clump of tall gladioli one August evening in 1984 with a pair of binoculars as if she were a 19th century botanist searching for exotic petals. "What can you see?" I asked Leland. "Nothing," she replied. "I'm as blind as a bat." I often regret that I didn't pay more attention to Leland when she was alive. She was a very distinguished writer, but she was also a very witty person. "A penny for your thoughts," the General said. "I was just daydreaming," I replied. "Don't you ever regret anything?" "Nothing," he replied, raising his chin adamantly in the air. I regret lots of stuff. Small things, such as failing to read enough classical literature when I was young, failing to travel across the globe when I had the chance, failing to take exercise and keep the heart in good condition. But such is life. We can't avoid regrets, and living with remorse can be comforting. It allows us to feel human. It's as if there were a special chamber in the heart, a depth of stillness where Beethoven's late quartets still play endlessly. I felt sorry for all that I have done badly, all that I have failed to do. I feel sorry for everything. And the funny thing is that such regret is comforting. It releases me from the burden of being perfect or even right about anything. The General came to visit because I had COVID. I was feverish for about 4 days. "You must have got an enormous load," he declared. "You talk like it was manure," I replied. I gave him a bottle of sparkling water with a vitamin C tablet and had the same myself as we sat in the sunshine at a good distance from one another. "Is this all you've got?" he wondered, looking at the sparkling water. He probably hoped I'd offer him gunpowder gin. "I can't drink alcohol at the moment," I said. "I'm on antibiotics." He stretched his hand towards the binoculars that lay on the garden table. Binoculars I have possessed since the day I bought them from my Uncle Oliver in Enniskillen in 1983. My uncle wanted Carl Zeiss lenses, and the only place to get them was Enniskillen. Before leaving the shop, I bought a pair for myself as well. But living in South Fermanagh at that time, and having a pair of binoculars on the back seat of a car, wasn't wise. People were arrested for less. Binoculars would have been a necessary item in the toolkit of any freedom fighter who wanted to monitor the movements of any vehicle along the lonely laneways. And no soldier in a high tower or a lookout post could be without their own pair. I heard of one soldier who was shot because of his binoculars. He was peering out from a tower, and the glass of his lenses reflected the sun, giving a sniper just one tiny moment to fire at him. Maybe I am naive, but for me, binoculars were never more than a beautiful remnant of Victorian tranquility, grandeur, and scientific curiosity. I remember a pair resting in the dusty window ledge in the porch of an old house just beyond our own when I was a child. One day I lifted them up with some curiosity, and the elderly widow said, "Those belonged to my father." I sensed a note of sorrow in her voice and left them down instantly. She was old enough to be talking about the First World War, the first great war of the 20th century, the war to end all wars. But I'm happy to say that I've only ever used binoculars to watch birds, dolphins, and flowering weeds on the mountain path. I've never thought of them as an aid for killing. "Aren't these binoculars wonderful?" the general declared as he tracked a bumblebee crawling up a blade of grass in the distance. "They are," I agreed, "although it depends what you use them for." I suppose what got me in that particular column was the need to share this sense of the ambiguity of life, Like that a thing can be used in one way and in the opposite. A pair of binoculars could be used to, check out a house where you're going to kill somebody. It could be used to track a car and the patterns of behaviour that the owner of the car might be using, coming and going to work at the same time every day and using the same road, so that it makes it easier for the terrorist to plant the bomb in the culvert of the road, or easier to even sit and watch and wait until you can get a shot at your target. So there are ways that something like a pair of binoculars can be used for good or for evil. A computer, think about it, can be used for good. Look at the amount of good you could do with a computer. Supporting a charity, or propagating your good message on Facebook. And then think of the dark ways that it can be used. Malicious, evil ways that you can use a computer. Obviously, I'm thinking of, the way it might be used in pornography, or just in libeling somebody, or sending a death threat. Like, anything we have in the world can be used for good or be used for evil, depending on our attitude to it. And then if you take actions, the same is true. So when you think about Ireland in 50 years' time, there's no logic that says if we bring immigrants into Ireland, it will change us for the worse. Like change it will do, but we're going to change anyway, because if you look back in the past 50 years, we've always changed. Even when there was only ourselves, we always change. every 50 years. So if you say, well, we have a lot of immigrants come into the country and they're going to change it, yes, for the worst, no. You cannot say that immigration will change Ireland for better or for worse. The same way as you cannot say that a pair of binoculars is something you can use for better or for worse. You cannot say that can be only used, that will only happen in a bad way. You can't say that. Every object is open to being used for the good or for the bad. Everything that happens has the potential for being good or bad. Immigration could be bad, and immigration could be good. It simply depends on how we go about greeting that moment, greeting that opportunity, greeting those strangers who come to our country. It's an opportunity, and we might take it or we might not, but it's not going to change the way we are. So, I suppose there is a number of little anecdotes and stories that I take from the Irish Times columns. And I wanted to share that with you because there are some people like to feel that they get a few stories from me in this zone, in this mood, with this feeling, without having any reflections about religion. And I'm so happy to do it. And I wish you a beautiful and wonderful weekend. And thank you for being here. Bye-bye.